Welcome to the Kennedy Report. I'm Kennedy Hall. Sadly, we've all heard the news about the shooting in Texas. It's a disaster. There really are no words in some ways, but everyone's talking about it, and people are politicizing the death of these children, of course, is what they do. So I figured I'd offer my 2 cents, but from a source that I think is a lot smarter than I am. So we're going to talk today about how Jordan Peterson has reacted to school shootings and what he would have to say about this. There's a clip we're going to watch together to discuss the real mess behind these things and what the real problem is and sort of how we could see some sort of real solution and how that can be found in the Catholic Church, which I think is the best way to look at it. But first, I do want to thank my sponsor, Noble Gold, who's been so gracious to us. Over the years, you've probably had a lot of different types of investments, stocks, mutual funds, etc. So you know that the market can be volatile and unpredictable. With inflation running at its highest rate in years, decades, you do not want more volatility and you do not want more uncertainty. Being able to sleep at night knowing your investment isn't about to crash is worth its weight in gold. Pun intended. And speaking of gold, if you've been jumping from one investment to the next, a gold IRA with Noble Gold is perfect for you. A reliable hedge against inflation just fell in your lap. With gold, you shield yourself from certain taxes. You keep the real value of your wealth. You own a global asset. You have something tangible, and you can help protect your wealth against an economic crash. What is not to like? And this month, for every IRA above 20K, you get an incredible 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin completely free. That is a cash value. That's given as a thank you from the good folks at Nova Gold. Call 1-877-646-5347. That's 1-877-646-5347 to find out more. Or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. You can find all the information in the link to this video. Thank you again to Noble Gold. Protect your investments. It's good advice for everybody. Okay, so this crazy shooting in Texas, it's super sad. There's a real demonic element to it. Jordan Peterson, like many things, has commented on world happenings and so forth. And one of the things that he's commented on in the past has been school shootings. And he has really insightful information. And I think that we can take that information and we can actually go one step further and add sort of the real spiritual element. Because you never really know with Peterson where he's going to go with how far he's going to take this idea of God and spirituality and so forth. I think we can go one step further than he does as we watch this together and sort of see how the solution to this can be found in the church. So it's about a 4-minute clip. We're going to watch parts of it together, and then we'll comment as we go. So let's take a look at the first bit.
You know, I read about the Columbine massacre and the kids who undertook it. That'll make your hair stand on end if you want to read something that will really disturb you. Reading Eric Harris's writings will really disturb you. No matter how much you know about human beings, reading Eric Harris's writings will disturb you. And Harris is Cain, you know. He says it straightforwardly. He hates human beings. He hates being itself. He would destroy everything if it was within his power to do that. And of course, him and his colleague were motivated to produce far more carnage than they managed that day. What was successful was only a fraction of what they had planned. And Harris said very straightforwardly that he had set himself up as the judge of being and that it lacked all utility in his eyes. Human beings, certainly, should all be removed from the face of existence because of their pathology and the fundamental horrors of being itself. It's why the mass murderers always shoot themselves afterwards, not before. Because you might wonder, if you're so upset with the structure of being, why you don't just commit suicide in your basement? Why do you have to go out and mass murder before you top it off with a gun to your forehead? Well, you don't make the point as effectively if you just commit suicide in your basement. It's like, well, my life means nothing to me. But neither does anyone else's, and neither does the structure of being itself. And I'll take all my revenge as much as I possibly can, and then just to show you how little I care, I'll cap myself off at the end. And I would say also, people say all the time, I don't understand how that could happen. It's like, I don't believe that. I think an hour of thought, of real thought, real thought about your darkest feelings about existence itself illuminates the pathway to that sort of behavior quite clearly. And I think if you, I mean, I might be
Yeah,
wrong.
he's exactly right. There's a couple things that I want to touch on here. First, he brings up this notion of Cain. This is part of his biblical lecture series that he gave a couple years ago, whenever it was. And he's talking about Cain and Abel. And yeah, when you look at the story of Cain and Abel, Cain is resentful to the he's resentful to the stipulations that God Almighty, being itself, you know, I am who am. I am existence, you know, as God says to Moses. He's resentful to the rules that are put in place by the man who makes the rules. And he rebels against existence itself, and that's why he kills his brother. He looks at life as something that's just stacked against him as unfair. And when you look, and I have the writings of Eric Harris right here, and they're really dark. I can't read most of it on the air. For one, it's long, and but there's just so many obscenities and stuff in it. But one thing that you see right from the beginning, he says, I hate the effing world. Too many expletive in it. Too many thoughts about societies all wrapped together in this place called America. Everyone has their own expletive opinion on every expletive thing, and he goes on. He goes on to talk about natural selection is the key, evolutionism. You know, basically, he's going to be the agent of natural selection. And then he really shows his car. He shows his hand when he gets to this point where he says, "Ever wonder why we go to school? Besides getting a so-called education, it's not obvious to most of us, you expletive, but for those of us who think a little deeper, you should realize it. It's society's way of turning all the young people into little good robots and factory workers. That's why we sit in desks and rows and go by bell schedules to get prepared for the real world, because that's what it's like. One thing that separates us from other animals is the fact that we can carry on actual thoughts. So why don't we?" Anyway, he goes on to say, the human race sucks. Human nature is smothered out by society. He's basically saying there stuff that we've seen with philosophers like Rousseau. You know, it's the structures of the human society that ruin the real nature of humans. He goes on to say, mercy doesn't exist. Anyway, there's lots here. You could read it. It's online for free. But it's important that Peterson has brought this up, because what it does is it gets at the actual theme. It gets at the actual heart of why someone would get to the point where they would do something like that. People often will say, you know, school shooters develop because they're nihilists. They develop because they are, you know, they believe in nothing. The word nihilism, right? Nihil in Latin. They don't believe in anything. So, you know, that's why they want to bring everything down. But that's not really the case. People who are nihilists usually actually lead themselves to something like suicide. That's what you see with Jean-Paul Sartre, for example, and, you know, Nietzsche. You know, the real hard philosophical question for them is, why not suicide? But when it comes to this desire to go out and wreak havoc on people, it's because you have to have a true resentment for the human race. And this is exactly what our children are being taught. We know that there is a resentment towards the human race that is being engendered in kids because we have this climate change environmentalism stuff shoved down our throat. Think about it. This young man who performed this terrible thing in Texas, he's around 18 years old or so. What has he been taught his whole life? He has been taught by the systems that basically he's the product of random evolution. He's been taught that he lives in a society that is unjust, that stole, you know, stole the land from the perfect people who were there before, and everyone is these white settlers and these Christians, they're just these evil people. He's been taught that everything he does contributes to the destruction of the human race by climate change. He's been taught that the structures in place because of this Judeo-Christian society, so-called, have contributed to the suffering of people who don't fit in. He's been taught that, he shouldn't have children because they're going to contribute to more climate change. He's been taught that, especially being the age he was, he just spent the last 2 years being told that his very existence and the existence of others endangers other people because of diseases, and that the human race should actually stay apart from each other because of that. He's been taught that unless everyone does the exact same thing and takes the same medicines, that those people put everyone else at risk and just spread death and disease. This young man has been taught to hate the human race. And most kids, in some way, have been taught to hate the human race. I'm amazed this stuff doesn't happen more often. It's not as if they've just been taught that their religion that they were supposed to believe is meaningless. That's one thing. That's like old school nihilism. It's gone from nihilism to something like annihilism. Not just nihilism, but let's annihilate the human race. This is the logical conclusion of what is taught to our kids. You're meaningless. You're the product of random evolution. You're no different than animals in any way that matters. You can slaughter innocents in the womb because they're not really people. Everything that you do contributes to climate change, which is destroying the planet, which is your fault because you use plastic straws. If you don't change everything radically now, the world's going to end in 12 years, or whatever AOC or these idiots are saying. They look around, no one's doing it, so they're going to think the situation's desperate. I just read an article about a guy who's like 68 years old and he lives in Vancouver, and he's applied for medical assistance in suicide, so like medical death or euthanasia, whatever. He's applied for that because of anxiety and depression brought about by the climate crisis. And he's been diagnosed with severe climate eco-anxiety depression by a doctor. And this guy's an environmental activist. This is the logical conclusion of everything we've been taught. And before I give you my solution to it, I want to see what Jordan Peterson has to say here. We're going to watch the last 2 minutes of this clip, but just hold that thought because I have a lot to say right after we see this part.
I think I might be wrong. Like, I might be a darker person than most, and it's certain.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
You spend years reading Solzhenitsyn and stuff, you'll be a little bit dark, I guess.
Well, at least I think there are plenty of people out there who are sufficiently dark to know exactly what I mean when I'm saying these things. And I would also say that if it doesn't leap to your understanding how that pathway might be illuminated, then you need to know a lot more about yourself than you actually know now. Because whatever you might say about someone like Eric Harris, he was a human being too, you know. There's this idea in the New Testament that Christ was he who took the sins of the world unto himself. It's a very complicated idea, but part of it is associated with the idea that he met the devil in the desert as well. To take the sins of mankind onto yourself is to understand that within you dwells exactly the same spirit that commit the atrocities at Columbine or that ran the camps at Auschwitz, and to actually understand that that's part and parcel of your makeup, and then to take responsibility for it. And I think that in the aftermath of the terrible 20th century, that's what we're left with. We're left with the necessity to take responsibility for the most terrible aspects of ourselves. And that way, perhaps we can stop
that's as far as we'll watch with him here. So he's exactly correct. He brings up the New Testament. He brings up Christ taking on the sins of mankind. Okay, since we have lost our understanding of Christianity, since we've lost our faith as a society as a whole, many people, obviously you watching this probably believe, but since we've lost that as a collective, there's a vacuum. And there's a type of collectivism that makes sense in Christianity, i.e., We sin as individuals, but we're also part of this larger human race, and Christ died for our sins both as a whole and as individuals. So it's a sacrifice that is for all, but all as individuals must unite themselves to it. The thing is, that's only possible in a divine way. That's only possible through Christ. When we lose that, then we are left with this understanding, which is true, that we do have a sort of collective sinfulness. But because we're a collective without God, then there's no solution for that for individuals, because there's no such thing as saving individual human beings, because individuals are just part of a collective unless God intervenes and gives us the opportunity to save ourselves. This is why, there's this collective aspect to the Christian faith, sure, but again, there's the individual salvation of each person who has to believe and assent to the faith and live in that way. Whereas the world offers us only collective sin and only collective solutions. So we go back to climate change, for example. We are all screwing up the planet because we all use diapers and we all use gas or whatever, right? So it's not enough for each person to just stop themselves. That doesn't work. We can't, it's like when you find these people who are super environmentalists, like this guy I just mentioned who's trying to kill himself because of eco-depression. You'd think, I researched him. He's living his life in the super eco way. Like he doesn't use resources. He's like an eco guy, but he's more depressed because it's like a reverse of Christianity. When we seek to be deeper in the faith and live in a way of holiness, we receive more inner peace because we know that we're living in conjunction with the way God desires us to live. But when you seek to live in more of an environmentalist way, let's say, what happens is you see your life juxtaposed against the lives of everybody else. And what it does is it actually gives you something more like a depression because you realize that what you're doing isn't enough to save everybody else. You see? But we're not supposed to save everybody else. We're supposed to save our souls. Christ is saving, quote unquote, everybody else because we can't. But when there's no Christ, there's no salvation. And when there's no salvation, there's only despair. The only solution to these school shooting things, whatever, it's not gun control. Listen, we have gun control in some ways. We have car control. You can't get a license without you can't drive a car without a license and without passing a test, and you get pulled over if you break the rules. People can still go mow down people in a crowd. That happens in Europe all the time. Car control has not stopped the driving over the killing of mass amounts of people by trucks and things like that by terrorists in Europe. It just happens. You can't stop it. The only way you can stop it is through the faith. That's it. And I'll end with this. One of the young ladies who was killed was a young lady who had just taken her first communion, and there's a picture that was shared on the news. Little first communion dress, white dress. She had just done her first confession. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this thing happened in Texas, because Texas is where abortion, the fight for Roe versus Wade came into being. It was in Texas, and Wade was the attorney for Texas. And Roe was the person bringing the person bringing the case forward. Anyway, and Texas had struck down abortion rights over and over again. And it eventually went to the Supreme Court, and we know what happened with Roe versus Wade. But recently, Texas was the first state to reverse the trend with the heartbeat law last year and led the charge. I don't think it's a coincidence that as it's the impending overturning of Roe versus Wade, which means that the innocents will no longer be slaughtered, that someone who was probably demonically influenced had to slaughter the innocents in his own state. I think there's something providential. I think there's something weirdly, I don't know if providential is the right word, but demonically symmetrical or something about that. I don't know. In any case, ultimately, the only way to stop this stuff is through the faith. These sins are unforgivable in the natural sense. How do you forgive a school shooter? You can't, unless the forgiveness is supernatural. How do you rid young children of this brainwashing that they're basically these agents of destruction that are just destroying the planet and are a stain on the human race and evolution messed up or whatever. How do you fix that? Well, you can't without the faith. The only way through this is with Christ. That's a lesson we should take from this. Pray for the victims, pray for the families. Pray for their souls. It's a dark time, but we're reminded in these situations that the only way through is through the cross. And that's the only solution. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out how you can help us. Become a patron and so on and so forth. We're getting a local setup. It's just, yeah, I'm busy. I'm trying. Thank you for everyone for joining. Again, pray for everyone involved and pray for Jordan Peterson's continual conversion. And thanks again to our sponsor, Noble Gold. Okay, that's it for today. This has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.